welcome everyone, the incubators and the startups, and especially our both the speakers of today's session. Welcome to the weekly webinar knowledge sharing session that we have. We are delighted to host this interaction on building deep tech capabilities in the startup ecosystem. The idea behind this discussion is to get educated on deep tech sector and learn about how we can leverage these capabilities in building products and solutions, especially in the incubation ecosystem that we have under Atal Innovation Mission. So to facilitate the same, we have with us today Mr. Umakant Soni. Mr. Umakant Soni is a co-founder and CEO of Art Park, AI Robotics Technology Park. They are trying to build the AI mothership for 6 billion users. And he's an alumni of IIT Kanpur. He holds 2 patents under his name. He has also served as CEO and co-founder of AI bot startup Vimigno 2009 and co-founded strategy for advanced technology innovation arm Wipro. And he has also found India's first AI fund, Pi Ventures, for $32 million, and backed by some of the best AI companies in India, including Tiktuple, Niramai, and others. The second speaker that we have in today's session is Mr. Vishnu Vardhan. Mr. Vardhan is a startup enthusiast working on human-centric entrepreneurship and startup growth programs. He is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Atal Incubation Center, Pondicherry Engineering College Foundation. It's a technology business incubation center supported by Atal Innovation Mission Niti Aayog. He's currently working with young fledgling tech startups, focusing on electronics, design, manufacturing, Internet of Things, unmanned aerial vehicles, etc. So with that, we can get to the session that we have today. So briefly, again, I think the topic itself does talk about what the session is about, but I suppose it's not very clear because when we say deep tech, it's a term which is very subjective and it's not very widely understood. So to Mr. Soni first, I'd like to invite if you can help us decode this deep tech, what deep tech is about. Let's start with that, and then we can get into more deeper discussions about how we can leverage these deep tech for Indian startup ecosystem. So over to you. You're on mute.
Thanks, Vinay. Thanks for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, good evening. Yeah, I mean, some places I think it might be getting into evening. Good to be here. The very quick brief intro of myself. I spent almost close to 20 years making lots of errors, especially in technology area. Last 10 years have been as an entrepreneur and investor. So I started India's first AI chatbot company called Vimagino, and this was in 2009-10. Even that point of time, Siri was a very small startup, struggling startups in Silicon Valley. We built the technology, but we failed to, find customers here. So I spent a year in the Silicon Valley trying to understand the power of ecosystem. And I came back from there, with a perspective that we need to build this kind of ecosystem in India because we have talent. And the CEOs of Google and Microsoft both are Indian, so we definitely have talent. What we actually don't have is ecosystem. And so I started India's first AI-focused fund called Pi Ventures, along with my other co-founder, Manish Singhal, and we invested in 10 companies, and I think now 12, raising $32 million. Some of them are now crossing $100 million in valuation, and a couple of them are crossing $10 million in revenue. So definitely we have talent, and we can grow these kind of companies out of here. Post that, I went back to Government of India, and of course worked very closely with Niti as well, DST, Department of Science and Technology, MeitY, and studies on the need for building this deep, idea to impact innovation engine. And that is where the reason, the deep tech is actually important, because uh, so the deep tech startups, they have, they're not only having business model innovation, but they're also having technology innovation. So first, you need to actually prove the science, and then you deepen the tech, right? That means that first you need to prove that science works. And once the science works, then you need to actually make sure that you're able to translate that science into engineering, right? And then you are then able to layer it with business model innovation, right? So that is how the deep tech startups are actually fundamentally different from, e-commerce startups or other startups that you might see, right? Because the technology is already there, right? You just have to fashion the business model onto the technology. But here you need to deepen the technology, deepen the science, and then deepen the technology. And because it takes around, in my experience of as an investor and mentoring quite a few companies in this space, what I realize is that it takes around 4 years for a deep tech startup to deepen the science and deepen the technology, right? Now, in those 4 years, you may not be actually able to fashion a business model out. And in those 4 years, when you're building the technology and deepening it, you might struggle to come up with any of the business, level metrics that you might want to show to the investors. So that's where it becomes very tough, because for those 4 years, you probably have to either put your own earnings into the startup, or maybe need to find out few friends and families who really believe in you and won't ask questions for 4 years. And that actually is very hard to do, right? So that is where I've been championing this whole idea of creating this idea to impact innovation engine, which is linking university ecosystems with research parks. Like in US, you have SRI, Stanford Research Institute. In Canada, you have Mila. In China, there are more than one, and there are a few actually now. And so what it does is that it basically, while universities can come up with validated research ideas, you need to convert that research into working prototypes, right? And then you prove the science and tech somewhere, right? Now, if the proving of science and tech can actually work in more grant-driven environment rather than an ROI seeking investment environment, then you are actually able to get it to a stage where then you can flourish as a company. Because otherwise, if you 4 years you're investing in just deepening the science and tech, you hardly have another 4 years. Typical fund cycle is around 7 + 1 + 1. So that's actually, like, it's a very little known fact, but even VCs have to return money to somebody else, right? So when they put money in you, the clock starts running, right? So first 4 years, if the clock is not showing any uptick in valuation, but you're just building the science and tech, then after that they've got like maybe 3 or 4 years in which to sell their stake in your company and return the money to from where they've actually taken the money. So that actually becomes a big challenge, right? Because I would rather like to invest in companies which only have to prove the business models, that, okay, this business model will work against another business model, because then I can have a full runway of 7 years to recoup my investment from, versus a deep tech company where I might have to sell the mangoes when they are still raw, right? Versus selling them when they are ripened and they're giving fragrance. And so if I sell my mangoes raw, I hardly get like 10 rupees per kg. But if I can sell the ones which are ripe, then I might get 200 rupees per kg. So that, in a nutshell, in a very simple language, is the difference between a normal startup and a deep tech startup.
Um, right. Thank you, Makant. Actually, so once we have, kind of established, as you have put down, trying to convert science into technology, and that is, like we understand that science is very theoretical. That takes time for it to get into converted into technology, and this whole period of space when the startups are there, this is kind of called deep tech space. And we have a lot of I believe we have a lot of different areas which are there. AI ML is the emerging one, blockchain, and all these other areas. But I'd like to also put forward one question so that we have a real understanding of what deep tech startups and solutions are right now, what they are doing. So if you can talk a little bit about kind of products and solutions we are seeing in India, especially, and then maybe trying to compare it with the overall world where we are. If you can talk a little bit about that. Sorry, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give you a couple of examples actually. So there is this company called Nirmai that we invested in. It's a company which is applying AI to breast cancer screening by looking at the thermal images of breasts, right? Now, typically, when you look at thermal images with your normal eye, your eye is not trained to look at thermal images. So thermal imaging has been around for like 25, 30 years, but its usage as a radiology tool has been very limited because radiologists, because their eyes are not trained to look at thermal images, they couldn't actually have very high accuracy from it, right? But imagine that each dot in a thermal image, has an RGB value which is corresponding to a number in terms of temperature, right? Now, a number is something a machine understands really, really well, right? So what the fantastic team at Nirmai did is that they said, okay, the computers can actually understand what this image is trying to say way better than a human being could, because each dot is representing a temperature value. And based on that, they actually built an AI model which was predicting breast cancer really, really early, right? Now, so the science for this was proven in a company called Xerox Research, right? So when the team Xerox Research was breaking up, and they had this license available for IP available for license. So the team which was working on it, they brought the IP out. We invested in them so that they could pay them and get the IP out. Then they had to take this technology and prove it, right? Whether this is working or not, whether the results that they're showing they are accurate or not in the medical terms, right? So they had to go through what we call as this process of clinically proving themselves that, okay, whether my science is working or not, whether my science is actually mapping to better outcomes in terms of detection, right? And this process, and we have seen that we've invested in that company, right? It's taken them 4 years. Now they are ready to go into market in a big way, right? But so this is where I say that, okay, you need to deepen the science. There's another company I'll give you an example of. It's called 103T. It's a very interesting company. They have a heart patch, and it's a very simple heart patch, which has got, so that heart patch you can keep above your heart, and it transmits all of the data of your heart to the cloud. And on the cloud, there is an algorithm running which can tell whether your heart is behaving normally or abnormally, right? Now, this is very useful for people which are just coming out of surgery or which are going to go into surgery, right? So the both step down ICU as well as step up ICU, both of them actually have usage for it. Because with this technology, you can convert any normal bed into a pre-ICU bed or post-ICU bed, right? You need to monitor people because people are typically destabilized because there are a lot of drugs given when you get into the ICU, you get operated upon, and they might be destabilizing your heart. In fact, what they found out was very interesting. They found out that 40% of the people who undergo surgery, when they come out, they have irregular heart patterns, right? And imagine if you already have some issues, and this combination could really propel you into a very different direction, right? So now in their case, it's kind of very interesting. They're developing these new sensors which actually can, sense your heart very, very accurately, right? In fact, they probably are one of the first world's first to do that, right? And now, so that's the hardware, right? So they need to, make sure that hardware works reliably when the patient is laying down, patient is up, it is twisting, turning, all of that time it works, right? Then on the top of that, they have a software layer, right? So the hardware is talking to sensors all the time, right? And it is connected to the cloud. And on the cloud, they actually have an engine which is looking at the data and then, combining the data to say, okay, whether the patient is sinking or swimming, right? Now, if I see it, their hardware is going constant improvement because the better technology is available. They get more battery out of it. They, they have better sensors. The sensing is better, right? But at the same time, their hardware, the software stack is also moving, right? Because they have more data now, so their algorithms are more sharper. They can predict like more accurately. Now, making sure that hardware and software is working well together, right? It has taken them almost 4 years of proving it in multiple hospitals, multiple situations, that this technology really works, right? Now they're ready for scale, and they're ready to get more VC venture funding. But imagine if they could have all, so while we funded them, we invested in them, we took inordinate amount of risk. What we also realize is that the deepening of science and technology could have been accelerated if they had access to more resources, right? And that's why in Art Park, yeah, in Robotics Technology Park, we are actually giving some of these deep tech startups this kind of expertise. We call it four elements: data, talent, domain, and research. So you need, as a deep tech startup, apart from capital, you need four things to succeed: data, talent, domain, and research. If you don't have these four, you are likely to struggle. If you have only three, then you might have to pivot till you find the fourth one. If you fail to find, what we have seen is that a lot of these startups, they get sold, they get acquired by somebody, or they die, right? That means the people leave the company and then they die, which is a sad state. Um, if you have only two of these four, then very little chance that you might have a shot at it for more than 3 to 6 months, right? You might die within 3 to 6 months. I mean, this is the our data of 430 startups tells us that you need these four elements apart from capital to be successful. So I think this is actually very critical when you're thinking about ventures, we're thinking about markets, we're thinking about interesting ideas, right? To actually assess two things. One is the time it takes, right? Like you cannot shorten, even if you might put more resources, but the baby will take 9 months to get delivered, right? So there is a certain amount of time that is needed for you to prove the science and prove the technology. And it's hard to shorten the time when human lives are at stake, right? So especially in healthcare space, the cost of error is very high. So you want to make sure that you prove the science and prove the technology on the field in enough number of trials, right? So that you show that it works. So time sufficiency is important. The second aspect is what we call as capital sufficiency, right? That you need to have enough capital for you to sustain through these 3 4 years of experimentation, making sure all the layers are working well, right? And apart from that, what we also realize is that the teams are very important, right? So your team actually has to have this, when we say deep tech, so that definitely, if your CTO is not writing papers or is not able to understand papers to translate it into, cutting edge technology, it's very hard to, survive out there. I hope that I was able to make my point clear with some of the examples as to why deep tech is, deep and hard.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Makan. So actually, bringing in the other perspective, which is the, kind of aim for this particular webinar is from incubator side. So we have Vishnu with us. So Vishnu, over to you. Like if you can talk a little bit about, you have an experience of running an incubation center and supporting startups. So, if you can talk about like kind of challenges and roadblocks, especially you see while interacting with deep tech related solutions and startups. Um,
Yeah, sure. Am I audible, Vinay?
yes, you are. Please.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me in this session, and it's given me pleasure for sharing my thoughts along with Umakantji. So I hope like Umakantji has given a very detailed perspective of what a deep tech is and what the startups are doing. When it comes to the current ecosystem that we have in India, right? So yes, it's definitely booming over the past 3 5 years with respect to deep tech solutions. We are booming a lot. but still there are a lot of gaps to be filled in. So as Sir told, over the past 1.5 years when we were running this incubation center, and we are based out of Pondicherry, and it's in second tier city in India, and we believe like most of the innovations right now are going to be boom from second tier and third tier cities in India. So that's the reason AIM has been really effective in establishing incubation centers, targeting more tier 2 and tier 3 cities, if I'm not wrong. And when it comes to deep tech startups, right? So most of the startups that we are involved in are in a very fledgling stage. And as Umakantji told, the gestation period for these kind of startups is too high, right? So probably the time they take for developing their product from inception to product will take a minimum of 2-3 years. And when it comes to AI, it's about 2-3 years. And when it comes to drone system, it's even more like 2.5. And biotech and life science, it's going to take even more time to develop your product itself. And then comes the commercialization phase. So there's a lot of resource gap that is right now existing in the ecosystem for these kind of startups who are basically in the deep tech space. And it's a trend right now going, like most of the startups whom we interact, they have a good problem in hand and they sugarcoat their problem statement, we are having an AI solution or an ML solution, like such thing. And they believe like incubators or enablers are right now looking for these kind of deep tech solution, and probably we might get into that. But it is a very intense job, like when it comes to deep tech startups, basically if we are trying to give an AI solution, and over to the discussion like Umakantji told, like it's very customer centric, right? So they need to have a very early of customer deployment to be done. And the three challenges that we see basically startups from this domain is, one is the gestation period, as I told you. The time that take for the technology to move from lab to market is quite high. And the capital intensive, like what are the specifics that was told for AI, like they need large number of data, and for that they need larger amount of infrastructure to handle that data, and kind of technology readiness level. And after going through all this process, probably they might come up with a good solution. And then there comes the difficulty to get the market access, and getting it reached to the market access, and probably the market should be ready. And for an example, this 3D printing, which is really going up right now, it took minimum about 15 years for them to come out from the lab in MIT, right? So the 3D printing technology got initiated in the year 80s, and probably it was in the late 2000s or early 2000s that the market was accepting that. So that is the major challenge that they have, apart from the funding, as Sir told. So this is where the startups are finding it difficult, finding the right use cases for their solutions, and giving the right solution with the technology that they have. More deep tech solutions are in the breakthrough stage, like they are breakthrough innovations, which is not probably existing in the market, or probably it's not having a greater use cases. And when it comes to India and startups whom we are handling, we suggest them to have an industrial use case for these kind of solutions. When it comes to Niramai or the Heartbeat startup which Sir was discussing, they were more customer deployment oriented, as well as they have an greater use cases. So that is where we intend these kind of startups to concentrate more in. We are right now having near about 1,000 plus deep tech startups in the Indian ecosystem. And when it comes to ecosystem in Pondicherry right now, in our incubation center, we have 2 startups. So out of the 10-15 applications specifically for deep tech, we are able to in an hindsight, we are able to find only these 2 solutions which might have an better commercialization stage in the later. So as Sir also mentioned, like Niramai, probably they got initiated in the year 2016-18, if I'm not wrong. It took 4 years for them to give that solution for that market. So this is where we feel like deep tech startups require a lot of resources, and this is very common in deep tech startups, and that has to be fulfilled through this ecosystem which we are trying to build. And it has to be approached in a collaborative way. Not all ecosystem can be a deep tech ecosystem. We're having a good ecosystem existing in Hyderabad, in Bangalore, and now it's time for us to go in a collaborative way. And when I was looking into Art Park, there was a great term that I came to see, like inclusive AI for a billion. So that is where we need to work on as an ecosystem, like get into inclusive and collaborative approach, so that we probably down the line in a decade's time, we might be in deep tech capital for the globe.
Right. Thank you, Vishnu. So, now that I think we have kind of started off with understanding what deep tech is, and where do we stand as a country or as a market in terms of deep tech, and then we also discussed a little bit about the challenges that we are facing in this emerging field that we have. I think now is the time that we get into improve it, make it better, because that's all we can do. So, in terms of improvement, I think important aspect is developing those capacities, especially in students and young entrepreneurs. Yeah. Of course, there are aspects of providing the capital required for it, but also developing these capacities is what incubation centers' role is in a lot of ways. So, Umakant, like if you can talk about little bit about, like how, in a country like India, what kind of, how do we approach in developing? And we at Atal Innovation Mission also try to address this, especially, if you might have heard about our Atal Tinkering Labs initiative. Through that, we have few modules around AI, ML, and these kind of, emerging technologies. So actually, this discussion is over to you, both of you, Vishnu and Umakant, because I mean, you both interact with startups. So if you can share, Umakant, over to you first.
Sure. Yeah. So I think so. If I look at when we talk about AI, I mean it is not just one technology. It's actually four different waves that we are talking about, right? And different people are talking about these different waves at the same time, and that's why there's a lot of confusion in this whole space, right? So let me just demystify, that a bit. So if I look at AI, the first wave that started where the focus was on, the classic machine learning, approaches, whether it is, random forest or where you actually have, you will try to figure out algorithms, and then those algorithms you will try to create an ensemble of that, and then through that you will solve the classic recommendation problem, right? Like, so whether you're recommending products, you're recommending routes, you're recommending which product will fit your need. So all of those approaches were using that wave one, and they still continue to get used, right, for a lot of systems which actually have low compute availability, right? The wave one still works really well, right? And for majority of cases, right? So maybe 70-80% of the time it works, the wave one works really well. Then came this whole GPUs, and GPUs made neural nets possible. And then suddenly deep learning started flourishing. And then that was the birth of the wave two. We call it the deep learning wave. And then, we started breaking those benchmarks. So whether it is in vision or whether it is in, translation, right? So we started getting very near to, or in some cases, ahead of human perception and reasoning, right? And that has been very interesting because we started to solve a much larger set of problem, right? So the wave one was just recommending you, right? So but you still, let's say you went to the Flipkart's website, you might still you search in something, then you might still point you to the right product, but then you still have to select the product, and the company has to pack it manually and then ship it to you, in your with manual intervention, right? But in wave two deep learning, what we have seen is that now they're able to employ the whole the packaging part, that is getting automated, because they can see whether this is the right product that you ordered or not, right, in the conveyor belt, and then they can pick it up, right? So you're starting to tackle not just 10-15% of the use case, but actually a little bit more, maybe 30% of the use case, right? Now the wave three that we are starting to talk about, and it is just beginning, what we call as human-like AI, right, where you can train AI in maybe playing chess, but the same AI, I can take it and use it for figuring out how the images will work, or how a drone should navigate in an uncertain terrain, right? So you're actually crossing the domain. So it's basically crossing the domain, and then so you have a contextual awareness that you're able to put it into place in some other new environment, right? So now imagine a live case scenario like Flipkart, how it might fructify there, right? So you have selection of the product, which is wave one. Then you are able to package it and pack it, by leveraging computer vision, right? You're able to grab the the object from the conveyor belt, maybe pack it around, right? And then you might have the drone delivery going through, right? Now the drone is using, vision, it is using, the spatial awareness and ability to apply the knowledge of navigation into an uncertain terrain and trying to deliver it to you, right? So the wave 3 would actually solve, almost 60 to 70% of the use case, right? Now you can see wave 1, wave 2, and wave 3 together are now trying to solve maybe 70, 75%, 80% of the use case, right? And that is where the real, AI comes into picture, because at that point of time, it starts to make, economic sense and say, okay, I mean, if the total, cost of, figuring out the product to delivery, was somewhere around 80, 90 rupees, and I can shrink that cost down to maybe 10 rupees, right? Like the way we invested in a company called Locus. So if you're, getting, it shipped, something from Big Basket. So they're using their routing algorithm to route it to you. And they are able to learn every time somebody makes a, routing error or something like that. So they're able to learn from it, right? Now, so this whole use case, which is going towards this 100% automation over a period of time, right? Of course, Hollywood and now, even Tollywood and, Mollywood, I don't know what you call it in South India, but, would like to believe that, the Terminator is here and that, what we call as wave 4, right? Like AGI, artificial general intelligence is here, but still quite far away, right? We still have these ton of edge cases to solve to go towards that wave 4, right? Which is more like what they show in movies, right? Wave 3, they are huge, right? Because it's going to unlock what they say, almost close to, $16 trillion of new economic value in next 15 years, right? So if you are an entrepreneur and you're looking at, solving these new problems that are emerging, definitely AI as a, as a tool, if you have a good tool, you understand the technology well, I'm going to attack this, or I'm going to attack this, or I might even attack something very horizontal as well, right? However, having that capability to attack that problem in a way where you're able to solve it 95% of the times is very hard, right? So what we have seen is that a lot of people are able to demonstrate POCs, right? Because POCs work at 75, 80% of the time. Your stuff works, that's great. I can show you and you will say, okay, this is cool, this is interesting, right? But getting it from 80% to somewhere like 95%, each and every node of that technology, right? And that is where we see that most of the companies actually fail, because they are not able to do that, make that jump. And going from 95 to 99% certainty, it's even harder, right? And that's where even bigger companies like Google and Facebooks of the world are struggling, right? Going from 99 to 999, 59 reliability, as they say, right? 99.999%, right? So that is where you get mainstream adoption, right? I think we are still 5 years away from that mainstream adoption, because to get to that 59 reliability, you need 1 trillion data points. There are very few companies right now which actually have access to that level of data. Maybe Google has, maybe Facebook has, but from that there are none actually. So in fact, one of the big initiatives that we are trying to do at Art Park is to create these trillion data point data banks and make it open to startups to explore and innovate, because unless we democratize data in this way, it's actually very hard for some of these startups to make it to those reliability numbers.
Right. So I think you spoke, from a young entrepreneur's perspective. So Vishnu, like if you can speak about capacity building, both in young entrepreneurs and students, how we can.
Yeah, so throughout the discussion so far, we were able to infer like it's resources that is much needed for these startups. So right from taking the product to MVP, testing it, getting it to the market. All these things requires resources, like the data points, like I was discussing about, like it requires a lot of infrastructure for them, right? So these are all the primary needs like these kind of startups are having. And one big thing like we miss right now as an ecosystem is the technological expertise. Not much people are having that access to the technological expertise that we are talking about. So the first engagement that we are planning to do over here is, as you told, like AIM initiated ATLs and AICs who are having these kind of programs where they are running AIMLs and robotics based training programs. So this is where we're investing more, the first thing, to get the technology expertise enabled in the ecosystem. And that is what AICs also do. So we conduct a lot of programs where we enrich these kind of knowledge. And it comes only when we are ready to invest in translational capabilities, like taking the innovation from lab to market, whatever is required, like grant-based translational activities, what the Western countries are doing much. It's now the need of the hour to set up accelerators and enablers like incubation centers within a technological host institute. So that is where you have these kind of young minds who can be trained in these kind of technology, and probably they might come up and help the startups or even create more startups in this domain. So that's one thing that we are focusing majorly right now, spending on capabilities specifically with respect to translational capacity building. And second comes the ecosystem itself, like the incubation centers. It's not just the space that we offer, right? For these kind of startups, for handling those sort of humongous data, they require those kind of platforms to do that. And they are really expensive, to be frank. For any AI-based or ML-based data extraction and analytics, they need such kind of an infrastructure. So that is where the ecosystem enablers like incubators comes into picture, where we try to give that kind of a facility where they can come sit and work on their projects, and create their prototypes initially. And that is where then comes the use cases and the scaling process. So these kind of infrastructure development is much needed, and that can be done only through collaborative manner. So that is where these industries and corporations are coming into picture. Right now, there are much programs which are running, and I even came through like US IAI program, which is in cooperation that's happening today, if I'm not wrong, US India AI cooperation. So they are trying to invest more on research base with the collaboration with the US industry, where they are trying to invest more money on these kind of research parks and technology parks and universities who can come along with these kind of programs. And this gap we were able to identify, when startups, they are having a good problem solving idea and they tell like they want to integrate that with an AR or a VR, but they are not having any kind of skill sets or any information about how to proceed in that. So there were startups who were having these kind of pain points when we when they got interacted with us. So they wanted to develop that skill with respect to these kind of deep tech. So that is where we are lagging much in this space, and that is where we are also trying to collaborate much and get this technological expertise more into the startup field as an ecosystem enabler I'm talking about. And one more thing I just wanted to add is, like, we have a drone-based startup who are working on systems, and it's really difficult for them to progress on their prototyping phase because there's a lot of compliances that we need to take care of when it comes to drones and kind of specifically drone-based solutions. So the policy making here plays a major picture. Yes, it is inevitable to avoid these kind of policy making, especially when it comes to these kind of drone-based technologies. But probably the structure what we are following right now. So whenever they are going for an piloting or a POC testing for a mapping a particular area, we need to get a lot of permissions from the state government point of view. And when it comes to dealing with manufacturing a drone, it's really difficult to getting the parts. And we have been trying to procure a thermal imaging camera for some kind of a support over here, and it's been more than 1 month for us to clear all these compliances, where we can get this product at the end of the day to get tested for the solution that a startup is trying to work on, right? So these are the major things that we need to work on, and that is what we are also doing right now. It's evolving, and it takes us to like 5-6 years more for us to reach that level, right?
Yeah. So I think I just want to add, I think it's very beautifully pointed out. So there are multiple things that we are actually trying to also provide for the startups or maybe the incubators who probably are growing such startups. One is that, of course, the data bank that we are creating. The another one is what we call as facilities, test beds, right? I mean, a lot of these advanced technologies, you require test beds, right? Like for drones, you require test bed, right? For 5G, you require test bed. If you're trying to do autonomous driving, then where are you going to test autonomous driving, right? I mean, India doesn't have those test tracks. So we actually are creating, one of the largest test tracks. I mean, these test tracks are going to be bigger than what Google has got for testing Waymo, right? So we are actually setting it up in, Chalakya campus at Indian Institute of Science, where we closely partner. We are also creating a drones, airstrip for, UAVs and drones as well, because we realize that for them to be, getting tested, and these drones are not the consumer drones that we're talking about, but these are like more professional drones, right? They might be carrying cargoes, they might be carrying blood supplies, they might be carrying, multiple kind of equipments. Uh, so you require these kind of test facilities, right? And I think you spoke about the skilling part of it. We realize that there is a huge amount of difference in the skill levels, and while you can attend a course in Coursera or any of the online courses, and it is good for you to know the terminology, you actually need to apply them to actually know what's actually working or not working, right? So we actually have a program called Lablets, which we just have started, which allows for this both offline and online learning. So you actually can get your hands on some of these robots, and you can actually work with it. We have a humanoid robot called Asha, at Art Park, and then we are setting up this whole, new area of warehouse robotics, where we actually have these, warehouse robots which are working. So you can actually come and you can try and you can, build stuff on top of it. In fact, we are organizing what we call as Art Park Robotics Challenge 2021. Where the challenge is, can you build robots that can clean toilets, right? Because we often see that public toilets are really messy, and because of that, people don't use them, right? So if we can actually have a robot that can go in and clean and take care of it, that could be very interesting. So we have very heartening to see that we have 139 teams from all over India participating, and a lot of them actually are from tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and which is very interesting because I think they definitely identify with the problem. And if they're not going to come up with solution, who else is going to come up with solutions? We also opened our internship program, and we got 400 plus people trying to get internship at Art Park. And we realized that a lot of them were actually from tier 2 and tier 3 places, and it is heartening to see that. And we found that some of them actually had built really good use cases already. They had some idea about like how to work with these systems, and so that was like really heartening. So I think potential is there. We definitely need to build ecosystem to, one, map it to the right opportunity areas, and also to beef their skills up to the next level.
Right, right. Thank you, Umakant. Thank you, Vishnu. So, like I do have one, two more questions at my hand, but rather than getting into that, I think we have kind of covered the cycle of understanding the space and then understanding the challenges and what kind of solutions we can implement. Like I would like to, open up the floor for questions because we have a lot of, quite eligible people on, like, the incubators, the CEOs and the managers of those incubation centers. So, they work with the startups and they have more deeper understanding about where we stand in terms of deep tech in Indian context. So, I'd like to open up the floor. If anyone has any question, any point, any remark, please raise your hand and then I can call you out and then we can, you can put forward your point. I'd like to specify that, it doesn't necessarily has to be a question. I mean, if anyone has any, like any kind of doubt or anything that they want to put forward, especially to deep tech.
This is Prithvi here. I'm also part of Atal Innovation Mission, but I wanted to understand from both of you guys about one particular aspect. When you see, like when I was a graduate doing my graduation, I was really interested in deep tech courses, but unfortunately at that point of time there wasn't any program from any of the big universities as well to actually guide any of the students in with respect to the emerging technologies and frontier technologies. But today it has been not like that. There is a massive online push, and I mean, you can easily enroll all the courses. But still, we are not able to get the students, especially the graduates who are in the computer science or electronics background, or in fact, any other background, to push them and empower them with such kind of courses. So, how do you think we can actually address this issue with respect to uh, empowering the human capital on these kind of technologies, emerging technologies?
Yeah, so I see that opportunity is the biggest motivation for everyone. And you'll be so surprised during COVID. I mean, people from India surpassed people from US in terms of active users in Coursera, okay, when the lockdown happened. And it is something that is very, very interesting, especially, given the amount of talent that we have and the the drive to learn new things that this talent has got, right? So I think what we need to do is to map it to opportunities, right? Where are the opportunities? Which are the big opportunities that are opening up? And I'm so happy that Indian government is looking at being Atmanirbhar and the whole Make in India perspective, because it is actually making us open to buying solutions which are developed here, right? Which is fantastic, because if you look at US government, they buy 500 billion dollars worth of technology each year, and that's a huge market. Imagine if they're giving out this $10 billion contract Pentagon is giving out for cloud services. Now it's a huge contract and it's an emerging area, and whatever actually gets developed will become a standard for everybody else to follow, right? I mean, even when we are using Bluetooth, we are paying somebody in Sweden a few cents because they came up with Bluetooth, right? Now, and that is where I feel that whether you look at drones, whether you look at autonomous driving, whether you look at this whole mobility, right? Like Japan is estimating that 50% of their shipping is going to be autonomous, right? By 2040, right? Now, these are huge areas because there is none right now, right? So next 15 years are going to be these massive areas of opportunity, right? So if we are able to align, the innovators with the opportunity, right? And I think thankfully now government can provide that opportunity by saying, okay, I'm going to actually buy the innovation. I'm going to, go towards these, forward-looking goalposts, right? And since if they will be looking at, the private enterprise will also looking at, and that will create the huge demand for these solutions to be developed within India. And I think that's where I see the big opportunity, which is there, which wasn't there earlier. And I think that's some of this is actually thanks to the proactiveness being shown by the government, saying that if we can create the vaccine, we can also create other things as well. And I think that's right.
Yeah, so adding to that, so to Prithvi's question, right? So as he told, we are evolving. Like there are a lot of courses which are coming in, and being in an technological host institute, yes, there is a lag in that, like where people are really implementing the technology that they are learning in the upcoming courses. It's always it happens in India, right? We have this follow the shepherd kind of a thing. Like when someone goes for a particular thing and we follow them, like that's how this new technology learnings are happening. There are very few people who are really passionate and intending to have an impact on what they are trying to study and implement that. So that is where our enablers are able to identify such people and give them that particular thing. But it will take some time. Down the line, we'll be having more people who are really having that intensity and passion to solve pressing problems in the society. And I had a question over here, like someone was asking about, is there any deep tech startup who's utilizing a deep tech solution for social impact in India, like ecosystem impact or humanities? Yes, we do. Even in this, in our incubation center, there was a startup. There is a startup called FlowGet Solution, and they got initiated in the year 2017-18. And the problem that they were able to identify was this was from government's perspective. Okay, so there are somewhere around 7,000 plus tube wells in Pondicherry alone, in our Union Territory alone, and who are pumping out groundwater without any monitoring. So that's the state that was established in the groundwater authority of Pondicherry. And down the line, to a couple of years before, Pondicherry is known for water resource, specifically potable water resource. But the ground table got reduced substantially. And then came this problem of, okay, let's kind of monitor those things. And that is where this solution comes into picture. So they have developed a sensor-based smart meter, which indicates the amount of water being pumped out of these ground stations, and specifically from bore wells, and they communicate that to a central server, which is being monitored by the government authority. And they piloted that, and right now they have in early traction right now, and they have got few orders, and they are trying to install that in the industries across in Pondicherry through Groundwater Authority of India, Pondicherry state. So that is where these kind of IoT based or deep tech based solution can really impact on the social impact. And there are many people who are working on that. Even Niramai is kind of solving that kind of an issue. It's a very big social impact like breast cancer, which has been highly impacting the ecosystem, right? So there are many startups who are working on that, answering to Deepan Modi actually. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Vishnu. So I think a question from Dr. Sajeline, and I think the question is around, are startups willing to get assistance from institutes for implementing deep tech, and how much they are willing to pay for the innovations in deep tech or learning? I think given the collaboration between startups, trying to connect the startups and the institute, research institute or academic institute is one important aspect. So if anyone, Umakant, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so I think it depends upon what the knowledge levels are there at the institutes, right? So if the knowledge levels, because see, the one big challenge has been that so far our institutions have been very much tethered to the syllabus that has been prescribed, right? So they're not going beyond those syllabus, right? So in terms of that, their knowledge can get dated pretty quickly, right? So I mean, unfortunately, startups have to be cutting edge, right? If they're not cutting edge, then somebody else is going to take their market share away, right? So if they're at cutting edge, the institutes also need to be at cutting edge. So we see that, okay, there are a few institutes in India which probably are at that cutting edge, and where they are, startups come, and we have quite a few startups that are starting to work with Art Park because they feel that, okay, they can actually learn something from us, right? I think in other areas, maybe a lot of institutes will actually benefit from learning from startups. So in fact, I would really suggest that, a lot of your, incubatees should actually go back to the institutes, and, they should actually go and teach that, or maybe at least help them. In fact, one of the suggestions that I had was like, the fourth year of, project, which is there, right? Which is typically, I mean, I saw a very interesting startup which was just creating projects for students, and it was making a good amount of money from them. But I felt that it was like, tragic waste of human talent, right? Now, imagine if instead of the fourth year, they're wasting on those mundane projects of library automation and all of that, if they can actually work on creating a rocket, or maybe trying out a new kind of a drone, right? Now it's a fabulous learning opportunity for students as well as institutes, and it is also a great augmentation for these startups, because then they might get future talent coming from them, right? So I think we need to actually have this, some kind of a merger of these startups with these institutions as well.
Yes, sir. As you rightly said, that was the thing even I was looking at when you are expecting the question. Basically, right, 90% of the college, when you do the fourth year project, most of them are guided by the project coordinators. And I think when you have a collaboration or synergy between the startups and the faculty of the institute, that would probably give us more practical projects in the engineering sector or any other sector, I would, if I may say so. So I think how do we, if you look at that way, so where do you think from the gap is between, like on the part of academicians, or is it because of the startups that are not open to, let's say, try from the academicians because of the credibility? Where is the gap you see it?
Yeah, there is definitely a credibility gap in terms of academia being. I mean, most of the startups think that academia are actually not at the bleeding edge. Okay, and because they've been very cocooned in their own environment away from industry, so they are probably away from practical use cases, and that's why I feel that we should actually take it up as a strategic intervention. We should actually liberate. I mean, we can start with all the IITs. In fourth year anyway, they're wasting their time. So maybe open them up to either working with a startup, and then the startup can actually give them projects, and that way it is useful for both of them, because these guys are going to come back, and they're going to come back, and they're going to tell their professor or fellow students that, hey, I'm working on such and such area, right? And in a university environment, the peer learning is the fastest way to learn, right? So anything that you're working on, you want to see, okay, what the other guy is working on, and you learn from it. So that way, the infusion, because I see that, there's a lot of deadwood in the current academic scenario, right? And I think this would be a way in which we can really inject new thinking, new dimensions into academia. And I think this is very much important if you really want to make a push towards Atmanirbhar, right? I mean, where those technologies are going to come. I mean, it has to be young blood. I mean, when Facebook got started, I mean, Zuckerberg was in his first, second, third, fourth year, right? So if the ecosystem is there where there is a fresh thinking going back and forth, right? That's when people will try out new things, and maybe some of them will become Google, some of them will become Facebook, some of them might become SpaceX, Tesla, who knows, right? So the potential is there. I think we need to create more opportunities for them so that they actually have a way into these kind of entrepreneurship, and I think as a nation we will benefit from that.
Yeah, actually, I
Right.
just need to add one point in here, like
Mhm.
as the gap that was identified where startups can get into the picture of, getting the capabilities done for the students or even for the faculty. So it's actually, we are quite biased to higher education institute when it comes to innovation or research, more kind of into IITs or IIMs or NITs. So there are even more state-run universities who are really keen on taking these kind of projects, right? So what we are doing here is like in the fourth year, specifically on the 8th semester, the curriculum has been set up here in the source engine in a way like the entire 8th semester can be taken for an internship, and they can complete their 8th semester in the 7th sem. And right now, what we are trying to integrate here is like we have given them proposal like where these 8th sem students who are looking out for internship or going out for industry outside Pondicherry, like Deltas and all those manufacturing sector, we are trying to rope them into the incubation center where they'll be spending the entire 6 months with the startups and help them out in working on their research phase or in their prototyping phase or in their MVP creation phase. So that will, as told, kind of peer learning. That is where these technologies can reach more. And probably it's time for us to consider more state-run university or even rural or tier 2 city universities and get that capabilities or that infrastructure built up there, because there's already a lot of resources available in IITs and there are a lot of innovative minds over there. Let's create more on these kind of aspects, and that is where I think we might be coming up in the years down the line.
Brilliant.
Yeah, lovely. I think there's a raised hand by Dr. SM. So, sir, you can unmute yourself and please.
Thank you, Vinay. And thank you, Umakant and Vardhan, for the great presentation. I'm the startup manager at Anna University. So actually, here the ecosystem, the innovation entrepreneurship system is evolving. So me being the startup manager and our director, sir, we run a Center for Entrepreneurship Development. I mean, we look after Center for Entrepreneurship Development. And as part of the awareness programs and all, we talk to the faculty members as well, in order to show them the right direction, how student startups could be encouraged. So one major challenge and major, question asked by faculty as well and students themselves is the interdisciplinarity. Suppose there is some student from mechanical engineering wanting to do something in drone technology, IoT. So how do we, we are certainly organizing training programs relevant to the field, and also, making offering a very fundamental training as well, for them to, switch easily to the other field. However, still, there's a long way to go. So this is first question, and additional and related question is, we being the Anna University, students are preferring Anna University for the traditional ways, like for getting a high salaried placement or studies abroad. So how do we change the mindset of the students? How do we encourage them more towards entrepreneurship? So I'm looking for good key points, using which I could do some magic. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, you could actually get them to spend a summer at us in Art Park, and we'll try to change their minds. I mean, but
Okay.
the point that you've raised is an interesting one. I think definitely Anna University and some of the universities actually have very good matured, academic sections, and
Yeah.
I think opening up the last year I feel that actually is an amazing way, because see, students, they need to have role models, right? So how would they would have role models unless they are able to touch and feel, okay, how's the, startup life is, or how's the entrepreneurship is, or, what joy it is to actually apply what you've learned into something which is actually impactful and real, right? So unless they see that, it's unlikely that they will be willing to take risk, right, into these areas, right? But once they do, then probably it's never going back. I've very rarely seen people, who have jumped from corporate life to startups, talking about going back. I mean, I think out of 100 people that I know, probably maybe 4 or 5 might have gone back, right? Because they were never suited for a startup in the first place. But rest of them, they've never gone back. It's like, once you do that, then it's very infectious, right? So I see that, we need to initiate them into, trying this out. Maybe last year, free them up, free their, as I think they have done it in Pondicherry, free them up on the academic side, and enable them to actually experience this. And that could be one. The other one that I see is that, you know, uh, I think academia also needs to open up. I think I would really love if you can actually, expose, entrepreneurs to come and teach, at some of these universities, right? And because, they are, in some sense, right, they're practitioners of that knowledge, and their knowledge, is useful not only to the student, but also to the larger ecosystem as well. So I think that is the part that I see that probably is kind of broken. But if we can get them to come back and teach, and because I've seen that done very successfully in Israel, right? Like the professor goes out, he does a startup, he sells that company, again comes back, and people have done it like 3 or 4 times, and you look at where they are, because each time they've applied their knowledge, and so they are at the cutting bleeding edge, and look at the quality of students that they are able to attract, because people know that, hey, this is a guy who's done 2 or 3 startups. So in fact, one of the things that we are doing at Art Park is that we are encouraging faculty members from ISC to turn entrepreneurs, just because if they turn entrepreneurs, the role models for students will change fundamentally.
Right.
You're right.
That's just because you brought this up. How can universities get associated with the Art Park, like so as to be little motivated with respect to drone technology and AI? Of course, a
Yeah,
lot of
no,
work is happening here as well, but still, like.
yeah, so sure. I mean, we are happy to encourage, and we can also we have a few student fellowships also that we are awarding to the deserving ones. So please write to me. My email ID is at umakant@artpark.in, and I'll be happy to figure out ways and means of associating with the university. We're also doing a strategic research partnership with MIT, and also with KTH. So why won't we do it within India? Of course.
Okay, thank you so much, Umakant.
Vinay, just 2 minutes. I'll just add out to what ma'am was handling here. Being in similar kind of an university host institute, so we have been here for 1.5 years right now within the campus. To be candid, like there are 3,000 students studying in this university, and after conducting such a lot of outreach events, we are able to attract only 10, 15, or even a handful of 20, 30 people to get into this incubation center to get to know what is happening, right? So that is a big challenge because that's the risk and the culture that we have been having over the years. So it takes some time for us to convert that. So how we can do that? So we are right now having two programs. One from the university itself, from the institute itself. They are offering credit-based, basic entrepreneurship course in engineering curriculum, right? So from third year to final year, they do that in 2 semesters. So they add on basic entrepreneurship, problem-solving skills, how to identify the problems in the society, and how to integrate their mindset and technology to creating that solution. So the end part of the program will be engaged with incubation center. So that is how curriculum based things can be taken up, because we are always academic over here, and we are most of job seekers are available here. So we need to change that mindset and get that culture into that. That's the first step we are doing. And when it comes to faculties, under MHRD, there is a scheme where faculties can start their own ventures when they're working in the institute itself. So that has been launched here in this institute, and there is an institute startup policy which has been launched, and thereby we're encouraging faculties. Probably there are only 4-5 faculties who are really keenly working along with incubation centers when we are launching these kind of outreach events. Not all will be interested. That's a true fact. And when we want to pull in those uninterested faculty members, they might be having a high worth of IPs in hand, but they're not commercializing it. So that is where the startup policy comes into picture, the institute startup policy, and we are encouraging them to, indulge in with the incubation center, register a startup whenever they're having a very good IP and have that viability to commercialize it. And probably they also convert the students here in this institute as an intern or an employee over there. So that is where we can start, in a smaller steps. It will take time. That is the reality over here in this ecosystem. Probably a couple of years down the line, probably this institute where we are right now could be more, in line with the IITs in India right now.
Right. Varun,
Yeah, you just need one Satyan Bansal or, one of the Flipkarts to come up out of the institute, then everything will change. We are a country of role models. We follow role models.
So, Varun, which policy you were talking about? Is it the national state policy, or you're talking about?
Yeah, charity they have launched an institute startup policy scheme, which has an they have their own kind of nomenclature in that, and that has to be followed for launching an institute startup policy specifically, where faculties can be.
Yeah, but your university has to adopt it for it to be formally, correct?
Exactly. We need to launch a policy. The institute has to launch a policy.
Institute has to, yeah. So there is that's a different area for discussion at Anna University. But as of now, we don't have a startup policy, either national or even the state one. So there's still work pending on it. Fine, but
we can
great.
Do that. It's iterative actually. We can't suddenly give these kind of changes into the ecosystem, which has been used to for some kind of an stigma.
Yeah.
So it will take some time. So we will be doing that. Don't worry on that aspect. And also, as Sir told, we need kind of inspirations. I think Anna University doesn't lack in that. We have a lot of CEOs from Anna University. So probably we can arrange a lot of AMA sessions or one-on-one discussion sessions, probably with a selected pool of students, and that will create more wave within the institute.
Yeah, we are already started to working on the coursework. We were already offering 2 courses, but now we are planning to offer a little more dedicated programs, and a little more hands-on, and also giving them exposure on incubation part. So yeah, certainly those are great thoughts. Thank you so much, Umakant and Vardhan.
Thank you.
Great. So actually, in fact, out of 68 incubation centers that we have at Atal Innovation Mission, 45 of them are academic. And as we are talking about, developing this entrepreneurial mindset in students, I think these AICs could be great place to start. As Vishnu talked about, the startup policy in their institute. And I see, more and more in many institutes, e-cells, entrepreneurship cells getting created, and students getting involved, calling the entrepreneurs in their campus and wanting to learn from them. So it's like, I think the need of the hour is in some ways, as you guys have said, the irony is such that professors are turning into entrepreneurs, and entrepreneur needs to turn into professors. So it's, it will be great overlap also. Wonderful. So with that, I think we have overshot time also. It's 10 minutes more. But it was a wonderful session, especially starting basic initial understanding about the space and where we are as a country standing and how we can improve it. So with that, I'd like to thank, firstly, Umakant and Vishnu and everyone else who has joined us today. I understand that, there's a video call, online call fatigue, which could have happened after 1 year now almost. But I think this is a great place to learn also, to, to learn from a person who is sitting in Bangalore and person who is sitting in Pondicherry. So it's wonderful. Great.
Thank you.
So
thanks
thank
a lot.
you.
It was a pleasure here as well. And yeah, I enjoyed my discussion. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, please shoot me an email. I think Vinay shared the email and would be very happy to, guide and share whatever we have learned. I mean, we were happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinay. Thanks for having me over here. Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks all.
Thank you, Vishnu. I've been calling you Varun. Sorry.
Yeah,
Vishnu.
no issues. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you, Umakant. Thank you, Vinay.